Hello, I'm Staff Sergeant Tyler King, Q Flight, Keesler Air Force Base. Today, we've sought out the experiences of airmen who've implemented PBED in the real world. Lieutenant Colonel Alex Lamkin, Commander, 81st Training Support Squadron, Captain Brandon Eves, Operational and Planning Instructor, 333rd Training Squadron, and Staff Sergeant Matthew Negrete, Defensive Cyber Operations Instructor, 333rd Training Squadron. How have you seen PBED be used throughout your career?
So I think PBED's always been there, even back to training, but I've really seen different focuses on different elements of it, depending upon the application. So doing C&E and OCO, so computer network exploitation or offensive cyber operations, there's a much heavier emphasis on the P, on the planning element, whereas in the defensive arena, there's really more of a focus on the debrief, because a lot of the time you've done all the same preparations for the planning, you've done the briefing to explain what you hope will happen, but if you're briefing as a defensive person, something's probably already gone wrong, therefore there's going to be more focus on the debrief portion, but it's been present throughout.
So PBED as a whole, used throughout, I've seen it used in many different things. So when we're talking PBED, plan, brief, execute, and debrief, that is a framework for continuous learning and for us to be able to react in when uncertainty or fog and friction takes place. So I've seen it in project management. I've seen it in cyber operations. I've seen it when doing communications planning for exercises and other operations. So really, I would say that PBED can be applied in almost anything in life. I've used it throughout my career in almost everything I've done, and it has served me well.
What roles have you played in the PBED process?
It honestly depends on the unit. For me, I think I participated in every single role. I've been a planner, I've been a briefer, I was in the operations though, so I definitely executed, and everyone should be a part of the debrief.
So interestingly, I think I've spent more time receiving the briefs than I have giving the briefs. So in my roles as a watch officer, both on the defensive side and on the offensive side, it was the responsibility of our operators to make sure that they were clearly expressing the intent of either their defensive countermeasures that were being put in place or the intent for their specific operation before they were allowed to go forward. So I've been the recipient, I've been the person that had to feel comfortable with what the operator was going to go do. And then I've also been the person who received the debrief to ensure that the operation went well, because it was my responsibility to pass that back to my supervision.
How is PBED used in the cyber community?
So when you're talking cyber community, there are 4 different mission areas in the cyber community. So we have offensive and defensive cyber operations, we have DODIN operations, and expeditionary communications operations. So the PBED process as a whole is used throughout all of those lines of effort. More specifically, probably in the offensive and defensive cyber operations realm, they are doing this every day. The beauty about the PBED process is that it's tailorable and that it can serve a need or a purpose within many different mission sets. So it is a framework for thinking, and as military members, we are constantly having to think and provide options.
PBED is used every day, daily, before, during, and after an operation. The beginning is the very first step is planning in PBED. I would argue is the most important. This is where we take the time to try to consider every single thing that could happen. It's a plan for, hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of scenario. We will incorporate a process known as ME3CPC². The idea there is that we'll just think ahead as far as we can, try to account for everything. Then you get into briefing. This is where we bring everyone that's involved in the operation and explain to them what's happening. Your team needs to be aware of what's going to happen, what you're going to be doing. Then once the vol window starts, you have execution. This is where the operation happens. At the very end, we need to discuss everything that goes on, everything that happened. The intent is for us to gather as much as we can about that operation and learn about it, and that all happens in debrief. I would argue that debrief is almost, if not just as important as the planning phase.
How important is a well thought out plan?
I mean, I don't think you can undersell how important it is to have the starting place, the middle place, and the end place of your plan readily understandable by everyone engaging in the operation and the mission and whatever it may be. I think if the old adage of if you plan to fail, if you fail to plan, holds true completely.
A well thought out plan is important. I think you should strive to have your best plan. So the plan itself is important, but the planning is the most important. So the thinking through the problem, understanding your environment, understanding your enemy, understanding yourself, and going through those thought processes in order to make a plan is important. And the output of that is obviously the plan. What we find in execution is that oftentimes our plan isn't the best. We haven't thought of everything, and that's the beauty of execution. The beauty of warfighting really is that the human dimension, uncertainty, fog, friction comes into play, and we have to be able to react. So having a flexible plan and understanding those how we're going to deal with that uncertainty or fog or friction is the most important part about having a good plan.
Describe a successful brief.
The brief requires that your team is well informed, that the briefer communicates everything that is actually important and understands their audience. There will be times that people will be briefing to a commander who their priorities, may be a little bit different. A good brief has somebody who knows what they're briefing, isn't always reading from the slides, but can answer questions as necessary, and is able to convey everything that is involved with the mission to their team effectively.
I think for a brief to be successful, the briefer has to understand the constraints and the restraints. He or she has to understand the left and the right limits and of the operation, and also a clear understanding of where they're going with the mission, with the op, with the action, whatever it may be. If you illustrate through your briefing, either through saying or not saying key aspects of your constraints, or completely lack the ability to say what the overall goal is of your operation that you're briefing, then you have lost a significant amount of confidence in the person receiving that brief, and I would question how effective you're going to be at the task.
Why is it critical to record observations during the execution phase?
Recording observations during the execution phase is critical because of the phase that's going to come next, which is the debrief. So your collections plan on yourself and the enemy is the foundation of the debrief. So if we don't have a good collections plan, if we don't know what happened during execution, then we can't critically think during the debrief as to how to either replicate those successes or avoid those failures that we experienced during execution.
Thankfully, we have a cheat code in cyber, right? We have logs for everything that we do, whether it's on the configuration side, the defensive side, or the offensive side. The important thing is to give notes and to give additional information and context to those logs, and that can only be done by the operator. Without that, we put ourselves in positions where we either repeat issues and fix the same thing multiple times, or if you're in a more adversary-focused sense, you put yourself in a position where you expose the infrastructure, expose the network to risk unnecessarily by not keeping track of what you've done previously.
Fascinating observation, showman. However, these cyber mission capable airmen had much more to say about PBED. Tune in to the next episode of Shifting Forward to catch the second half of our interviews.